Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to QC Talks. This is our third day out of 4 of this program, and thank you for being here with us. And thank you to our panelists and our moderator. This panel explores how artists work with communities to imagine new ways of belonging and how art becomes a tool for resilience, dialogue, and cultural connection. And to guide this discussion, we're pleased to welcome Tom Eccles, Executive Director of the Center for Curatorial Studies and the Hessel Museum of Art at Bard College, a position he has held since 2005. At CCS Bard, Tom has expanded research facilities, built the new Keith Haring Wing, and collaborated with artists such as Anne Collier, Rachel Harrison, Wally Export, and Wild Beshti. Tom has a very long CV, and I will not go into every facet of it, also because Tom is one of our regular guests on these panels. I'm going to now give the floor to Tom and the speakers, and enjoy this panel.
Excellent, and thank you. Thank you for getting out and early. The Qatar National Museum. As Jelena says, I'm Tom Eccles. It's always a great pleasure to moderate these talks, often put together by Jelena. This one, Art is Social Alchemy, Community Memory and Place. We have 2 truly exceptional speakers today, and I send the apologies of Oscar Murillo, who didn't seem to be able to make it out of Colombia for this. In fact, it allows us to focus, I think, probably on 2 artists who work, in similar but very specific and different realms. And the theme is that art can reshape the spaces we inhabit and the conversations we have. From transforming public spaces to keeping memory alive, artists are working with communities to imagine new ways of belonging. And I think this is sometimes true and sometimes not true. It's very, very true of Ibrahim and Emily. Emily Jassir is an artist whose work which spans a range of strategies, including film, photography, sculpture, interventions, writing and sound, investigates histories of colonization, exchange, questions of translation, transformation, resistance, and movement. She has a great installation just going up right now at Mataf as part of a new show there, which opens tomorrow night, which I hope you'll all see. Emily is the recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including a Golden Lion at the 52nd Venice Biennale, Prince Claus Award from the Prince Claus Fund in The Hague in 2007, Hugo Boss Prize at the Guggenheim, the Albert Award, and an Andrew Mellon Foundation Rome Prize Fellowship at the American Academy of Rome. Emily has been actively involved, I think you all know this to some degree, but we'll know more after this talk, actively involved in education in Palestine since 2000 and is deeply invested in creating spaces of knowledge production. Today she will speak about Dar Jassir for Art and Research, of which she was the co-founder in 2014, and which houses multiple projects grounded in shared encounters and hospitality. Dar Jassir is an interdisciplinary, experimenting learning hub that fosters cross-cultural and intergenerational exchanges. And we have Ibrahim Mahama, who's here. We're very hopeful that we will have a rather major exhibition with Ibrahim in the near future here in Doha. Ibrahim Mahama is a visual artist based in Ghana. He's known for his large-scale installations made from jute sacks previously used to transport cocoa, beans and charcoal, which are emblematic of Ghana's commodity dependency. His work explores themes of commodity, migration, globalization, and economic exchange. Ibrahim's ambitious installations often transform urban spaces and are a commentary on labor and decay. His notable projects include Out of Bounds at the 2015 Venice Biennale and A Straight Line Through the Carcass of History, which has been shown in various locations worldwide, including Athens, Kassel, of course, and New York. But we asked Ibrahim, in the context of Art as Social Alchemy, to speak about his work at the Red Clay Studio in Tamale, Ghana, which he founded in 2019, and which serves as a platform for exhibitions, research, and community-based learning, as well as an important platform to promote art in Ghana. And we can start with Emily, who's had quite a fast-paced morning to get here, followed by Ibrahim. We'll have an exchange after that, and then we'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
First, just to say thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me and hosting me. In terms of the theme of this panel, I will talk about Dar Jasser for Art and Research, which is a space I founded in 2014 in Bethlehem. And I'm looking at my phone because my notes are on my phone. I'm not actually checking out social media right now. Dar Jasser was built in 1880 by my great-great-grandfather, Mukhtar Yusuf Suleiman Jasser. He was the Mukhtar of Bethlehem. And part of the impetus of this project, along with being a space for us to produce knowledge, to gather, and to work together, was also to protect this architectural heritage. We're kind of left on our own in the West Bank to protect such spaces, which are regularly destroyed. So it's, as Tom said during the introduction, it's an experimental interdisciplinary learning hub. And we really emphasize participatory approaches, and we foster cross-cultural and intergenerational exchanges. We are, again, it's really important to emphasize that we are process and practice oriented. And this comes from a landscape in which, after 2006, the EU really started pumping in funds into the West Bank and Gaza in this way in which there would have to be deliverables, and this kind of bureaucratic way of working, and kind of it really ruptured and disrupted the cultural scene. So we're working against this type of way of working, so that artists are coming to a process-oriented place. There are no deliverables. Artists lead. We are women-led, artist-led, and Palestinian-led. The whole team is Palestinian. This is also extremely important. And we're mainly addressing how to create and sustain access to culture in a community that is under siege and dispossession, while subverting these structures and transforming these oppressive structures and social injustices, looking at forms of self-determination and autonomy. So we restored the building, and the fact that we restored this building is also an important element on how the work and the people that gather in that space gather together. The structure of the building informs our methodology, because it was once a home. So it's a very intimate space, and being able to gather in a space like this, you see the historical photographs from our archive on the wall here, to look at our present moment and also into our future is integral to the way that we operate. And it's enabled the kind of development of curatorial approaches that are quite different, based on the way the structure of the building makes us interact with each other in such an intimate space. Also, the other thing that's important is that we're not open to the public. We're actually closed, because this is part of our methodology of creating a space where we can gather and make mistakes and fail and have difficult conversations. But like a family home, occasionally we'll invite you in for dinner or lunch. Land is an integral part of our project and has been for the last 10 years. We facilitate space for farmers in our area and around between Bethlehem and Hebron and all the villages in between to come to work on projects. This is one of the projects that we did in 2018 by Mohammed Saleh, who created the first urban farm in Palestine. I should also say that Bethlehem today is now surrounded by over 20 settlements with settlers, and they have completely encircled the city and have confiscated all of our agricultural land. So now no one can reach that land, which is another reason why working in the space around the house is also so important for us in terms of also teaching the kids in our neighborhood about what grows, how it grows, which then leads to traditional forms of dancing and singing. So this is actually the way the land looked in 2014 when we started doing renovation. It was completely, this is the same terrace, but 2014, because the house lies right next to the wall that they built and a huge Israeli watchtower, and is regularly tear gassed. We live in the most tear gassed place in the world. And it's constantly being attacked. The urban farm Mohammed Saleh built ended up being burned down by the Israeli army in May of 2021. And so after that project, this is before the farm was burnt down. And I forgot to mention that he created the farm in collaboration with the kids in our neighborhood. So after that farm was burnt down, we created Ardawa, which focuses on healing the land from shrapnel, gas, and the damages it regularly sustains. And we created the first Arabic blog on bioremediation. This is from an event in which we were talking about sunflowers. We planted the terrace for 2 summers with sunflowers because sunflowers are a natural way to clean toxins out of the land. So there's the first summer that we had the sunflowers that were taking all the toxins out of the land. Yeah, which then ended up being fantastic because everyone in the neighborhood, you walk by, it's on the main street. So there's a lot of photo shoots actually on this terrace. Vivian Sansour was our first land resident in 2018. And in our discussions with her, it was really generative for us also because we spoke about how the land is an archive and the architecture of the building is an archive, and we are actually working on preserving the archive that we have. So all of these things are sort of intertwined together in the way we work. She built this, she planted mulukhiyya onto this terrace, and then we did a workshop talking about home, while we picked the mulukhiyya and cooked it together, which is a staple food in Palestine. And the piece was inspired by a 14-year-old boy who was shot on our street on his way home from school in 2014. And when Vivian had interviewed his mother said he had a bag of chips in his pocket, he was hungry, and he was coming home to eat lunch. That interview that she had with the boy's mother, and then knowing how the terraces are used at Dar Jasser is what inspired her to create this work. So we work slowly, patiently, and persistently towards the liberation of our minds and our bodies and our lands. We work with elders, farmers, and artists to reclaim also indigenous farming traditions as well as establish new ones. And then, as I mentioned before, an integral aspect of the work that we do is our sonic and dance heritage, which is intrinsic also to the land and to the work that we do. So over the course of the last 8 years, we have been producing our own dances and soundtracks. in collaboration and in exchange with southern Italy, from Naples south, mainly in the Salento region in Puglia. This is also part of our insistence that Palestine belongs and is an integral part of the Mediterranean. And we insist on holding on to that and owning it. And southern Italy and Palestine, particularly sonically, in terms of dance and sound, and even also architecture, many other things, has a very long, hundreds of years exchange that you can see on both sides of the Mediterranean. So when many of these dancers and musicians come to Bethlehem, it's like they're still in Salento. Everything is almost exactly the same. Maybe I'll just think of the important things to say now. So I think like one of the most important things that happens is the cross-disciplinary nature of what's happening in the space, because you'll have kids farming next to people trying to make music in our sound studio, next to people doing research. So, and those kind of connections in a space that's small like that leads to a lot of surprises and a lot of new work that wouldn't have happened in another kind of way of working. Now I'm going super fast. This is our sound project. Okay. Maybe I'll save the rest of this for when we have a discussion. So again, the focus on agriculture, foraging, and food as acts of resistance, tracing how artists engage with seeds, oil, and shared rituals to sustain both community and identity. From the hands that plant and harvest to the bodies that dance and move, the works speak to the endurance of place and the interdependence of human and non-human rhythms of life. I should actually end with just saying a couple of things. One is that we are working, because it would be remiss not to mention, we are working under conditions in which our people are undergoing a genocide. We try, this is someone that was supposed to, for example, supposed to be in our residency program, but he was taken under administrative detention. So the way that impacts how we work, the army enters our street almost every night. People are taken away from their homes and taken to administrative detention, held without trial or accusation. We have also been integral, along with most Palestinian artists around the world, in getting our people out of Gaza and raising the money to get them out of Gaza and taking care of them once they get out of Gaza. Unlike other conflicts like Ukraine, for example, which had the entire world giving them housing and education and the ability to cross borders, our community have had to do this completely alone with no help from anyone. And the reason I think Dar Jasser is so important now also is because this worldwide collaboration in ensuring that there is no possible way for us to gather as a people in a space and be together. I would say that my life's work has been about gathering our community. And if you think about the case of Palestine and the knowledge we have as a community, people who were exiled in 48, under the British Mandate, then in 48, then in 67, we have community knowledge and experience and networks to help each other, but there are these systems that are created to keep us separated from each other.
Inspirational and powerful. So, but if anyone can do it, it will be Ibrahim. So, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I thought that it might be interesting just to share some of the research and work that I've been doing. And again, please, if you can help prompt me at 15 minutes, that would be good. Yeah, so I'm going to run through this quite quickly as I can. So a lot of the work that I do, so my background is in painting and sculpture from my undergrad to PhD. I studied at Kwame Nkrumah University, and the curriculum that we used to work with for many decades was under the old British curriculum, the Han and I, and there was a generation, like some of our professors, caricature and others, who were really interested in somehow transforming like the art curriculum. So the idea was to shift art from a position of a commodity into a gift. So how do we think about the artist studio as a political medium for not just social change, but how to like really like excavate old materials, whether being it's like looking at buildings as archives or looking at, you talked about land as archive and all that. Yeah, so this image that you see on the screen is early 20th century, the building of the railway in the Gold Coast. And that was between like the 1860 and then 1920 something. A lot of things happened within the continent, like the extraction of rubber in Congo, the chopping of the hands, the building of the railway across the global south, things like that. So the question of labor is very important, because in the question of like what do we build as artists, because if you're an artist particularly working within certain extreme conditions, how do you constitute work, or how do we think about work, or what's the relationship of work to art itself? Yeah, so I'm mostly thinking about the labor of ghost or ghosts of labor, like what it means physically for people to contribute their labor towards building systems and how they are implicated within it. So in 2014, when I was just finishing art school, I had a chance to sell my first major artwork, and it was to the Saatchi Gallery in London. And I decided to invest the money into building a studio, because the idea of building a studio actually does more than just making artworks, painting, sculptures, or whatever. So started building, but the idea was to think about engaging with this land in the north of Ghana, which is very impoverished, and thinking about finding inspiration from objects that already exist, like these boxes that are used for repairing shoes and all kinds of other things around the country. So looking at the question of labor. So these boxes, normally they put tools in them, and they use those to repair like the soles of the shoes and all that. But I'm thinking about how we can somehow extract this question of repair from these boxes into going back into the histories of the railway and all these other systems which exist that normally it's very somehow detached from a generation. In 1947, Kwame Nkrumah, who was our first president, came back from America. He was the general secretary of the party called the United Gold Coast Convention. And the idea was to somehow work on getting independence for Ghana. In 1948, there were some killings in Accra by the British, which were soldiers who had returned from the Second World War, and they were instigating for their wages, unpaid wages and other things, and then they were killed. So Nkrumah, who was the one who wrote the petition, was later arrested and put into jail for a long time. And it's important to notice that it was the market women who contributed a lot of money, which actually helped towards his freedom. And then in time, he became the first prime minister, which led to Ghana's independence. So when I'm looking at these histories in terms of that labor that goes into it, I'm also thinking about it in relation to the art that we make and why it is important to already start thinking about the question of equality as a starting point when we are making art. So again, you'll find me looking back at the railway, because a lot of the work that I do also involves this kind of archaeological excavation. So like, for instance, a lot of these rail lines were produced in Germany in the early 20th century, brought by the British in Africa. They built the railway. The railway themselves have become a witness of history. So accumulating all these histories of like extraction. And then now, when they are old and then they are being extracted again, sold to China to be remelted, because they are archives, I will buy them and then using the residue from the art world in terms of monies that I earn from my work. And then I will rebuild it as part of the studio complex, because it's the railway line is like a spine. It's like the spine in the body, which runs on the ground. So this time around, when we are doing this exercise in the studio, we realize that now we're inviting kids. It's almost like a workshop. It's like an archaeological exercise which doesn't involve extraction, but this time around it's almost as if we're burying a historical form that allows for a different kind of imagination. So it's also important for us to think about the period of the non-aligned movement. In the 60s, people like Tito, Nkrumah, Abdel Nasser, and all that. And thinking about how we can think about it in relation to like questions of time, and also its relationship with, let's say, the conditions of people within this timeline that we're in. Since we're talking about a studio, it's not just about physical buildings, it's about objects. So it could be planes, it could be trains, it could be anything. So I started looking at all these historical materials, like planes from like the old, like Poland during the period of the Soviet Union, what's the name, airplanes from Czech Republic, things that were abandoned in Ghana. So a lot of them, even like the trains, which had been used, some from Kassel, post-war period, they had been cut for several decades. They were cut into pieces. So the idea was how to save them. And again, I like to make these historical comparisons to like even Goya's painting of the massacre. So the idea of like buying objects which are in a state of distress, but working with people to somehow put these objects back together again, like welding, simple activities like welding, or even moving objects across different areas, like moving airplanes across like cities. So this is like a 1,000-kilometer journey. It's almost like a performance. And then kids are getting to see these airplanes for the first time. The first time they're seeing the same truck that brings food from Burkina Faso in relation to an air. So it's so strange. It's almost like we're in this like a multiverse of madness or something like that. But I really like the idea that we can make these, we can engage in these new acts of imagination. So you see these planes traveling across, looking at it in relation to the iconography of the mosque, because I'm Muslim and where I come from in the north of Ghana is predominantly Muslims. And for a long time, people always said, but there was always this myth around the fact that we, because it was an Islamic society, arts, there was a limitation to it. And that was the reason why I decided to embark on it, because the main point was to somehow really expand on what was possible in terms of like what art can do. So you have the kids, now they play in the airplanes. So like the objects which was so distant, now as a studio space, it becomes something that is so, like, you know, it allows for all these imaginations, and also it allows for room for play. We can be using it as a classroom, but we can also be using it as a space for organizing collective meals, things like that. The railway line, like historical studio photography, you go to the studio and then there is a background with a train and then you stand and take a picture. But this time around, the railway line itself becomes the studio space. So you can stand and take a photo. So it's reorganizing family portraitures even. But you can also imagine that a lot of these families in the early 20th century, a lot of their ancestors were the ones who were taken to build the railway line in the south by the British. Or during the period of slavery, a lot of the slaves that were taken from the Gold Coast that left through the castles, a lot of them came from this region. So there is also a lot of question regarding how do we bring back these collective imaginations to entire generations. And again, it's also about the question of courage as artists. How do we bring courage to the world in terms of the work that we do? I always like to talk about this because the tall guy is a yellow. In Ghana, we call them the yellow. In India, I know they're the chuk-chuks. And we use it a lot in the city. And he came to the studio with 2 tourists. This was the height of COVID, because in the region where I live in, there was no COVID lockdown at all. So he came with 2 tourists, and he was so excited about the idea of an artist studio that he had never encountered in that way before, that he went home that day, closed in the morning, and he brought all the kids in his house. You know, he was like, you have to see what I saw today. And it was actually quite interesting, because normally in a society, you say that, oh yeah, but these people, they are not sophisticated, they don't understand what art is. But that was the whole point of it, that the idea that no one knows what art is. I always say that if anyone tells you that they are experts in art or they know art, they're trying to scam you. No one knows. We're constantly trying to learn, and that's what makes art quite beautiful. That through the precarities and all that, we learn. And you also find like the question of production again. So people who are contributing their labor to making, but at the same time can reinterpret that labor into reinterpreting art. So for instance, we have the work of Olafur Eliasson in this photograph. So we have the work of Olafur Eliasson. So again, you're asking yourself that question. What does it mean for a work by an Icelandic artist to be in a village which is being taught to school kids by, let's say, a local farmer or something like that? How to interpret art, I think, is also very important. And how, again, the question of redistribution. Whilst we're building, how do we distribute when we're building? So for instance, the entire studio is built from the scratch from 2015. But anytime we're building, we're inviting the school kids to come and see what we're building. And then they're asking questions, and they're in the foundation. Another time they come, the foundation is done. Another time they come, we're building the columns. So it's almost as if you are encoding the memory of institutional memory into a generation. Yeah, so again, reorganizing photos, portraiture. So these images should not exist, because normally these kids, when I brought these trains to the north of Ghana, it was the first time that anyone, even my father's generation, who had not traveled outside the north, had ever seen trains before. And there are things we take for granted, but they are not just seeing trains, they are seeing actual embodiments of history and memory. And also, you can realize that even when we're making these sculptures in the studio, which you'll see, it's open. So the kids in a local community, they're always there playing around the fabrication. So you might see this in Vienna or somewhere else, but I'm more interested in what happens when the production is taking place in terms of how these objects move across the world. And again, in the building, in relation to collections, because I acknowledge that as an artist coming from the global south, most of the work that we tend to do, they end up in Western institutions. Because again, that is where capital has accumulated. But again, as an artist, you also have to realize that it is our responsibility to redistribute what we make in the local community. Because it's a shame that these works might be in London, in New York, but in Africa, you barely ever get to encounter these objects. So what becomes the relationship between these? And the kids in this other image that you see in Tamale, they wanted to come, and the school didn't have fuel to put in their school bus, so they had to do a 40-kilometer run. So they're wearing their PE, physical education uniforms. So again, back to the question of courage. What does it mean when we let our work out there in the world, and what does it really do or affect? So again, images of like different contexts, making an artwork. Because in Africa, like again, as the work that we're doing, I'm making the contemporary artwork which will go to the museums around the world, but I'm also using the residue that comes to build actual spaces that actually preserve those works within those communities. Yes, so you'll find different scenarios of like different forms happening within the studio. The relationship between architecture, like in relation to how spaces can form, even when we're building them. Yeah, so again, these are I'm just running through images, and this is the last but one. So in this image, you realize that there's a woman with a mango selling the fruits and everything. And again, what's the relationship between because historically, this woman would have been a painting on the wall. So in the white cube space, yeah, you have to focus on the subject of what the artist has made. But I'm also really interested in what it means for us to be able to like create a space that is open in terms of its experience and all that, and how the conditions within the world itself is part of how we make art and how we experience it collectively. How animals are part of the space, chickens, goats, coming through the space, the collection, going through the studio. Again, what does it mean? In terms of, because there are ecological questions that we're asking. And how we distribute, taking buses to communities, because it's not good enough to build, but how to connect what we built with the world that we find ourselves in. Because those conditions are the conditions are dire. And this is the last image. So this one only connects, again, back to the image of Nkrumah and this professor of ours, caricature, looking at this question of death, this idea of like excavating the soul. And the studio, Red Clay, together with all the other projects that we've built over the years, all these ideas came from I borrowed most of these ideas from the early 20th century, from the heart of the British colonial empire, when these massive infrastructures were built for extraction. And then we're somehow extracting again from these, and then we're building new systems. So I really like this idea of thinking about just a century. What happens within a century when we even take the problematics of history and we somehow now transform it into a renewed gift. Thank you.
Yeah, when I just looking at these, I was thinking like, 20 years ago, and going forward, a lot of Western artists and sort of curators and people were talking about sort of utopian spaces, and there was even a utopian station at one point. People talk a lot about in America about Black Mountain College. They seem, and they talk about artist utopia. These seem quite pragmatic for both pragmatic and realist projects. Is there a difference? Or maybe something like, did you think it was going to be utopian, but you had to adjust your ideas? Did you have a bad idea that you realized and had to then respond to in terms of organizing these projects?
No, I think the whole point of art is always about the question of freedom, because we're always trying to re-understand or reassess what it means to be free, And like both of our projects, the idea is just to be able to take something, either from a historical point of view, and to open it up to the world in a way. Yeah, it doesn't really matter where it is done, who does it, but the most important thing is that as an artist, you're always rethinking about these things again and again and how you can redistribute these ideals of freedom. Yes.
Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree also that freedom is actually also at the heart of our project as well. And I think that I don't know if I would use the word utopic, actually. I don't think it's relevant in our case in a sense. But I think the important thing is the intersection of networks that pass through our space, maybe possibly would go to your space one day, and what's going on inside those networks as they travel. Because the people actually, in our case, the people that built that house had global networks. They were globally connected more than today. And I think that's something that we're also trying to reactivate. For example, 500,000 Palestinians from the city of Bethlehem live in Santiago, Chile. And so our house has become an address for that community and for artists that come from there. When they come to Palestine, when they come to visit their families, if they want to create works. So reactivating those networks also is an integral part of it.
I mean, running these kinds of spaces, I run a school, and you sort of have a kind of plan which you lay out, and you have a budget, but invariably it comes down to the people that are involved. And could you talk a little bit about that you're always in a constantly dynamic situation because it involves people and it involves place, and what are the challenges that poses?
I think with ours, it was, in the beginning when I decided to do this, I remember I spoke to my father, is an engineer, so I spoke to him. I said, look, I want to move back because I didn't grow up in this area at all. And this area I decided to build this is like it's a farming community. And I remember my father was telling me when he was a young engineer, they were selling land to him in this area. And he said, no, why would I go and live in this place? It's a complete forest. And there's just villages in that area. But I went there for the first time and I thought, there's so much promise in this place. There's the potential to learn because there was never any contemporary arts institution within this part of the world, or like there's this idea of building these community projects. But you also realize that there was a deep amount of spirit and energy within this place because people are doing communal farming and all that. And I thought, how do I borrow from that? And also, how do I bring my own ideas of art into this place? And how do we learn together? So from the beginning, we've worked with all the people within the community, the farmers, the laborers, like people that work in construction here and there, the weavers, because a lot of the works that I produce, textiles and all that, so we're always thinking, how do we bring different ideas from different craft areas into the making of like building of these institutions? It's a collective thing, because what I'm building, I'm not building it for myself, but I'm building it because I imagine that art can be something else. And in the process of building, I'm learning, the community is also relearning its own self, and it's taking different positions and all that. And it's coming, of course, capital is one of the biggest challenges. Yeah, because you're constantly, because where we are in Ghana, there's no grants, nothing. So I have to work constantly in order to be able to keep this machine or these engines or things going on. But I also think that is the beauty of it, because it's really, it constantly makes you realize why it is important, the work that we do as cultural practitioners. Yeah.
I'm going to answer this, but also going back to the previous question about the biggest mistake, and then after listening to your presentation. My biggest mistake was not building myself a studio at Dar Jasser. And while you were giving your talk, I was thinking, can I build a room for myself on the roof so I could actually do my artistic practice there? I think that without stating what the obvious biggest challenge is for us, the fact that movement and I'm talking about our immediate community, like within 2 kilometers of the house. Some days people can come to the space, team members, some days they can't. Some days the farmers can come, sometimes they can't. So but we're brilliant at circumventing all of these things and coming up with other ways, as we have been for generations. And structurally, the way we work, because you asked about the group involved and leadership, my parents were guest workers in the Gulf, as were many Palestinians. And this also links to the connection with southern Italy, the Salento region. This way of constant returns and leaving for work and returning has kind of been structured into the way we operate as a team. We have Anne-Marie Jasser, Nicholas Jar, Ahmed Al-Akra, Reem Khatib, Anine Khouri, because of the pressure our community is under, and because so many people have to go in and out to survive, it's kind of figured in that kind of way, which has been the way we have always operated for decades. It's so that sometimes one of us might be more present for several months while someone else has had to leave to make a living elsewhere and come back. So it's kind of structured into the whole thing. So it's movement is going in and out of the house regularly, and we've really embraced that.
Yeah, Ibrahim, you talked quite specifically about redistribution, and I think both of you are kind of like personally invested, and to some degree, I'm sure you economically. You talked a bit about selling work to museums in Germany and putting that money back into red clay. Do you see that as a responsibility of an artist, and do you think that your greatest form of redistribution is visibility to your community?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's always, I think it's about the question of responsibility of the artist. What's the responsibility of the artist? Again, yeah, because sometimes when you find yourself in certain parts of the world and you're making art, there's many things you don't have to think about. You're not thinking about what an idea of an institution is, you know. You're not thinking about capital, because there's a lot of grants in many parts of the world. But there are certain parts of the world where even the question of art in itself already, it's a problem, you know. How to even imagine it is an issue. And even the question of life, how to reconstitute life itself. Just normally people just waking up in the morning, having a meal, and thinking about living through the day. All these things. So when I started making art, in art school, one of the things that we had to think heavily about was about the conditions around the environment in which we find ourselves in. Yeah, so as an artist, I think that certainly it is my responsibility to make sure that the work that I do means something to the community that I'm in. It used to be the case. I tell you a story. There was, many years ago, there was an artist who went to the same art school I went to in Kumasi, and he had a studio in Accra. And then not a studio, it was a gallery studio, so like he made paintings, and then all the tourists would go to his studio and buy his paintings. So one time I went to an exhibition in Accra, in this car showroom, and I saw the paintings. He wasn't a great artist, but I liked his spirit, you know. I thought it was quite interesting. So I wanted to go to his studio and the gallery space. So one time I went there and I knocked on the door and he opened it halfway. And then here he was. I was very excited. And he said, "What do you want?" That was the first question. And I said, "Oh, I wanted to see your studio. You know, I saw your exhibition yesterday and it was very nice." And the first question he asked me was that, "What are you going to buy an artwork?" And I said no. Then he closed the door, you know. And I thought that was quite something, you know. So again, this has happened many times across different spaces. And the question always, that's why I started talking about the question of the inherent labor. Because a lot of the ideas that we have as artists that enables us to produce what we produce, they didn't just come from somewhere. From the sky. They actually came from around us, the historical conditions and everything. So though as an artist, I'm producing a work of art, I also acknowledge the fact that that idea that I'm working on is coming from a collective narrative and a collective history. So when I'm able to produce, when I'm producing, I'm thinking in that process, how do you redistribute what you're producing on a scale in such a way that everyone becomes part of it? Because people see what you're doing and like, yeah, you know, it reminds me of this A, B, C, D, but, you know, back in this day. And then there begins to be certain conversations. And I've seen how the work that we do has changed the dynamics within the city. Like normally, because we also live in a very patriarchal society, a lot of the women are home, they're cooking, they rarely go anywhere. But the idea that they pick up their children, they put them on their motorbike, 3, 4, 5 children, and then precariously they find themselves in the studio, they hang out the whole day, they have picnics, they see contemporary art, historical forms, because I also collect like historical archives, like pottery, textiles, all kinds of other things. So again, at the end of the day, you would ask yourself, if my responsibility was just to make beautiful installations and paintings, which would be in museums, then it comes back down to the same crisis and the same history of injustice, which as an artist, it's very easy for you not to think about it because you think, oh, I have done the work and then there is an audience in New York that has engaged with it. They understand art. They will preserve it. But I'm like, what about the children who are in this community? Don't you think that their parents' history, their grandparents' history, which afforded you to make this work, they also deserve to be part of the constitution of the work and its redistribution? Yeah, so it's a very political position.
For me, Dar Jasser is more connected to my pedagogical practice and my practice as a professor. So I see my role as an artist making artwork kind of in a different space in my brain, but also not really part of this project. I see my role in this specific project being more of a facilitator and also as a person fostering and bringing to the fore the ideas, projects of the young people that live where we live, to bring their projects forward, to give them a chance to lead. The fact that they're leading is integral to the work that we do. But also we do have half of the residents are actually international, so being able to have international artists leading projects or doing studio visits with young artists or lecturing is also an important part of it. So it's just coming from a very different place for me. I also wanted to say when we started the project, because we are women-led, at the time when we started, we said, we'll just lead by example. We won't publicly talk about being women-led. We'll just be women-led so that the women in our neighborhood know they don't always have to be assisting male artists or assisting male filmmakers as assistants. They can actually lead their own things. But then as time went on and the project continued, and just living through the process of the project and just being confronted with deeply, deeply patriarchal ways of operating, it became more important for us to kind of say, yeah, actually, we are women-led, and that actually really matters.
Maybe final, I'm getting a look from Jelena saying no questions from the audience. But may I ask a last question, because you are both really, truly kind of inspirational figures. What would you recommend to artists here in Qatar?
I'm going first on this one. I just arrived here for the first time in my life 2 days ago, so I'm not recommending anything. I need to learn before I recommend anything. How could I recommend anything?
Your recommendation is go see your show tomorrow at
Go see my show tomorrow.
Ibrahim, you've been here a few times.
No, this is only my second time. This is only my second time. But I don't think it only refers to Qatar, but I think it's just any young artists around the world. I think it's just the idea of like building on courage. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, to be able to build on courage, to always realize that the work that we produce as artists, we're not just producing for ourselves, but we're producing for the world. Yes, so regardless of the context of what happens in Qatar, you have to realize that whatever work that you're making is actually part of a very larger global system. So regardless, you really just have to push yourself to your extreme limits.
A wonderful way to end. So thank you, Emily, and thank you, Ibrahim.